He smirked when she signed the divorce papers, until the judge suddenly stood up. "Keep the pen, Sienna," Holden whispered, his lips curling into a sharp, satisfied smirk. "Consider it my final gift. You're going to need it to fill out job applications." Sienna didn't blink. She pressed the gold nib to the divorce decree, the ink bleeding into the heavy parchment, and signed away 10 years of her life. She pushed the paper across the mahogany table, but before Holden could reach for his victory, the heavy scrape of wood echoed through the silent courtroom. Judge Edwin stood up, his face dark with fury. "Mr. Rockford," the judge's voice dropped to a lethal calm, "you aren't walking out of this room a free man." The morning of the final hearing did not dawn with cinematic gloom or weeping skies. Instead, San Francisco offered a blindingly bright, ruthless sunlight that bounced off the glass facade of the Salesforce Tower and pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sienna's rented apartment in No Valley. It was a beautiful day for an execution. Sienna stood before the hallway mirror, adjusting the cuffs of her charcoal blazer. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. The exhaustion that had once hollowed out her cheekbones had hardened into something resembling polished steel. For a decade, she had been the invisible scaffolding beneath Holden Rockford. When they had first met, Holden was a mid-level manager drowning in credit card debt. It was Sienna's inheritance, a modest but crucial $250,000 that had seeded Rockford Equities. It was her late nights drafting business plans, her quiet charm at networking dinners, and her meticulous accounting that had turned a fledgling real estate venture into a Silicon Valley juggernaut. But as the company's valuation soared past 9 figures, Holden's ego had outgrown their marriage. He rebranded himself. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was an internet personality. His YouTube channel, The Rockford Alpha, boasted 4 million subscribers. He sold masterclasses on radical accountability, wealth generation, and dominating the corporate landscape. His audience worshipped his bespoke Tom Ford suits, his fleet of leased McLarens, and his aggressive, unapologetic rhetoric. And then came Clarissa. Clarissa was 26, held a dubious degree in communications, and had been hired as the VP of public relations. In reality, she was Holden's mirror, reflecting his narcissism back at him in high definition. It hadn't taken long for the late-night strategy meetings to shift to luxury suites at the Fairmont. Holden hadn't even tried to hide it well. He believed he was untouchable. When Sienna finally confronted him, he hadn't apologized. He had laughed. "You're a relic, Sienna," he had told her in their Pacific Heights mansion, pouring himself a glass of Macallan. "You're the starter wife. I'm a global brand now. You don't fit the aesthetic." He had expected her to cry. He had expected her to fight for a settlement, to scream, to throw things. He expected a messy, emotional breakdown that his high-priced legal team could use to paint her as unstable. Instead, Sienna had quietly packed a single suitcase and walked out. Now, sipping a black coffee from fills that had long gone cold, Sienna looked at the man sitting across her small kitchen table. Quentin was not the type of lawyer who bought billboards. He was a forensic attorney, a quiet, methodical man with a mind like a steel trap and a penchant for dismantling complex offshore trusts. "The final addendums are filed," Quentin said, his voice a low, steady rumble. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, tapping a thick manila folder. "Spencer filed their financial disclosures yesterday at 4:50 p.m., exactly as we anticipated. They rushed it. They wanted to bury the paperwork before the weekend news cycle." Spencer was Holden's younger brother and the chief financial officer of Rockford Equities. He was as arrogant as Holden, but lacked the intelligence to back it up. "Did they catch the discrepancy?" Sienna asked, her voice calm. "Not a chance." Quentin smiled faintly. "Holden's primary counsel is a shark, but he's a divorce shark. He looks for hidden bank accounts and mistresses. He doesn't know how to look for SEC violations, phantom shell companies registered in Delaware, or cross-collateralized loans tied to Vanguard index funds. Holden thinks he's starved you out. He moved 80% of the marital liquid assets into the Cayman accounts 3 months before serving you, retroactively classifying them as corporate debt. Which is a federal crime, Sienna murmured. Only if someone proves he signed off on it, knowing it was fraudulent, Quentin corrected. Which brings us to today. Holden's obsession with a quick, quiet divorce so he can propose to Clarissa on his live stream next week is his Achilles' heel. He wants you to sign the waiver of discovery. He wants you to take the lowball settlement, the heavily mortgaged Tahoe cabin, and a measly $2 million in alimony, and walk away. Sienna looked out the window. For months, she had endured the humiliation. Holden's PR machine had subtly leaked narratives to the press. Sienna was exhausted. Sienna was stepping away from the limelight. Sienna couldn't keep up with the visionary genius of Holden Rockford. His YouTube comment sections were filled with sycophants praising him for cutting loose dead weight. She hadn't fought back in the press. She hadn't engaged in a screaming match. True responsibility, she had realized, wasn't about shouting the loudest. It was about allowing the truth to crystallize in silence and then dropping it like an anvil. "Leopold is confirmed?" she asked, turning back to Quentin. "He'll be in the gallery." Quentin nodded. Leopold was the chairman of the board of directors for Rockford Equities. He was old-school money, a man who detested Holden's flashy YouTube persona, but tolerated it for the profit margins. However, Leopold had a zero-tolerance policy for financial fraud. Sienna had sent Leopold an anonymous, encrypted dossier 3 days ago. Today, he was coming to see if the rumors were true. Sienna picked up her purse. "Let's go give my husband exactly what he wants." The San Francisco Superior Courthouse was a towering monolith of granite and history. As Sienna's Uber pulled up to the curb, she saw the circus Holden had orchestrated. Despite this being a private family court matter, 3 independent paparazzi photographers were camped out by the steps, tipped off by Clarissa. Holden's own production team was there, a young man with a stabilized gimbal camera hovering near the entrance to capture B-roll for Holden's upcoming documentary about overcoming personal obstacles. Holden emerged from a black Cadillac Escalade, looking like he had stepped off the cover of GQ. He wore a navy bespoke suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist. Clarissa clung to his arm, wearing a white designer dress that looked aggressively bridal. Spencer flanked them, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, looking smug. Sienna stepped out of her car alongside Quentin. She wore no jewelry, just her simple charcoal suit. She ignored the camera flashes, her posture perfectly straight, her expression unreadable. "Sienna!" Holden called out, his voice booming with fake warmth for the cameras. He stepped away from Clarissa and approached her. "I'm glad we can handle this like adults. No hard feelings, right? The company is just moving in a direction you aren't equipped for." "We're here to finalize the paperwork, Holden," Sienna said softly, not breaking her stride. "Save the monologue for your subscribers." Holden's jaw tightened, a flash of genuine anger breaking through his curated facade. "Take the Tahoe house and be grateful, Sienna. Without me, you'd still be working middle management." "Let's proceed, Mr. Rockford," Quentin interrupted smoothly, stepping between them. Inside courtroom 302, the air was thick with the smell of lemon polish and old paper. The mahogany benches were mostly empty, save for a few court clerks and a solitary silver-haired man sitting in the very back row. Leopold. Holden didn't even notice him. He was too busy adjusting his cuffs and whispering confidently to his high-priced lawyer, a man named Vance. Judge Edwin emerged from chambers and took the bench. Edwin was in his late 60s, a former corporate litigator known for his razor-sharp intellect and absolute intolerance for courtroom theatrics. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the sprawling piles of documents. Case number 774-B, Rockford versus Rockford, Judge Edwin announced, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. I have reviewed the proposed settlement agreement. Mr. Rockford, your counsel has submitted a waiver of extensive discovery, citing a mutual agreement on the division of assets. Is this correct? Yes, Your Honor. Vance stood up. My client has made a more than generous offer to expedite this painful process. Mrs. Rockford will receive the Lake Tahoe property, a lump sum of $2 million, and in exchange, she waives all rights to Rockford Equities, its subsidiaries, and any future earnings. Judge Edwin turned his gaze to Sienna and Quentin. Mr. Quentin, is your client prepared to sign this agreement? I must warn you, if she signs this, she is legally swearing under penalty of perjury that she accepts the financial disclosures provided by the petitioner as the complete and total truth of the marital estate. Holden leaned back in his chair, practically vibrating with arrogance. This was it. The moment he won. He had hidden over $60 million. He had forged the board's signatures to approve loans to himself. He had built his entire empire on a house of cards, and Sienna was about to legally cement his immunity. Quentin stood up slowly. Your Honor, my client is prepared to sign. However, we have submitted one minor administrative addendum to the final decree. It is simply a reattachment of Mr. Rockford's financial disclosures, heavily initialed by my client to prove she has read them in their entirety. Vance frowned, looking at Holden. Did you review this? It's just the same disclosures Spencer filed, Holden whispered dismissively. She just wants to make a show of reading them. Let her sign it so we can get out of here. I have a podcast recording at 2. No objections, Your Honor, Vance said aloud. A clerk handed the thick stack of papers to Sienna. Holden leaned across the table, unable to resist twisting the knife. Keep the pen, Sienna, he whispered, his lips curling into a sharp, satisfied smirk. Consider it my final gift. You're going to need it to fill out job applications. Sienna didn't look up. She didn't let her hand shake. She took the heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen, a gift she had bought him for their 5th anniversary, which he had ironically brought today to sign her away, and pressed it to the paper. She signed her name. Smooth, elegant, final. She pushed the dossier across the table. Holden eagerly snatched it, quickly scrawling his own signature next to hers, authenticating the document. He handed it to the bailiff, who walked it up to the judge. Holden exhaled, a massive, arrogant sigh of relief. He turned to look at the gallery doors, already imagining the sunlight, the cameras, Clarissa's waiting embrace, and the YouTube video he would post tonight, titled, Cutting Toxic Ties. My next chapter. Well, Your Honor, Vance smiled. I believe that concludes the matter. Judge Edwin did not reach for his gavel to dismiss them. Instead, he pulled the heavy document toward him, flipped past the signature page, and began reading the administrative addendum Quentin had attached. For 10 seconds, the courtroom was deathly silent. Then, Judge Edwin's brow furrowed. He flipped another page, then another. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Holden with an intensity that made the temperature in the room seemingly drop 10 degrees. Holden's smirk faltered slightly. Is there a problem, Your Honor? He asked, trying to maintain his charming, authoritative tone. Judge Edwin slowly stood up, his black robes billowing slightly. His face was dark with a quiet, terrifying fury. Mr. Rockford! The judge's voice dropped to a lethal calm, reverberating off the wood-paneled walls. You aren't walking out of this room a free man. Holden blinked, the color draining from his face. Spencer, sitting directly behind him, dropped his phone. Vance, the high-priced lawyer, jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, what is the meaning of this? The settlement has been signed. I suggest you sit down, Counselor," Judge Edwin snapped, his voice cracking like a whip, "before you find yourself implicated in a federal conspiracy." Vance sat down instantly, his survival instincts kicking in. Judge Edwin held up the document Holden had just signed. "Mr. Rockford, when you signed this decree, you swore under oath that the attached financial disclosures were accurate. You waived discovery based on the premise that these documents represented the absolute truth." "They do," Holden stammered, his polished facade cracking. "My CFO prepared them." "Your CFO," Judge Edwin read from the paper, "apparently prepared a ledger showing the transfer of $42 million into an offshore shell company named Clarion Holdings, operating out of the Cayman Islands. A shell company that, according to these documents, is solely owned by you." Holden's lungs forgot how to work. He whipped his head to look at Spencer, whose face was completely ashen. "Wait, no!" Holden gasped. "That wasn't in the disclosures Spencer filed. That wasn't in the paperwork." "It is in the paperwork you just signed, Mr. Rockford," Quentin said, his voice ringing out clearly. He didn't gloat, he simply stated the facts. "Your Honor, as you can see in Exhibit B of the addendum, we did not attach the falsified financial disclosures Mr. Rockford's team submitted yesterday. We attached the actual internal ledgers of Rockford Equities, ledgers that Mrs. Rockford legally possessed as a co-founder and silent partner of the firm." Holden felt the room spinning. Quentin had swapped the documents. Because Holden had been so arrogant, so desperate to rush the process and insult Sienna, he hadn't read the addendum. By signing it to close the divorce, he had legally authenticated his own secret, criminal ledgers. He had just confessed to massive corporate fraud under penalty of perjury. "Furthermore," Quentin continued relentlessly, "Exhibit C details how Mr. Rockford forged the signature of his board chairman to secure a highly leveraged, illegal loan using company pension funds as collateral, a loan he then used to purchase the real estate properties he claimed were failing. "This is a trick!" Holden yelled, his alpha male persona shattering into panicked pieces. "She stole those! This is inadmissible! She hacked my servers!" "I didn't have to hack anything, Holden." Sienna spoke for the first time since the judge stood up. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of 10 years of silent observation. "You used my maiden name as the master password for the Cayman accounts. You always were lazy when it came to the details." "Your Honor, my client was deceived," Vance protested weakly, though he was already physically leaning away from Holden, recognizing a sinking ship. "Your client," Judge Edwin said, leaning over the bench, "has just committed perjury in my courtroom. He has attempted to defraud this court, his spouse, and the federal government. By his own signed admission, he has misappropriated tens of millions of dollars." In the back of the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors creaked. Leopold, the chairman of the board, stood up. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his cane clicking against the marble floor. Holden turned, and his blood ran entirely cold. "Leo," Holden whispered. "Leo, I can explain. It was an investment strategy." "Save it, Holden," Leopold said, his voice raspy, but echoing with absolute authority. He didn't look at Holden, he looked at the judge. "Your Honor, as chairman of Rockford Equities, I was made aware of these discrepancies by Mrs. Rockford. We have an emergency board meeting scheduled for noon today. Holden Rockford will be stripped of his title as CEO, and based on what I have just heard in this courtroom, our corporate counsel is already dialing the SEC. Holden fell back into his chair as if he had been shot, The arrogant smirk that had defined his face for a decade was gone, replaced by the hollow, slack-jawed stare of a man watching his entire universe collapse. "Bailiff," Judge Edwin commanded, his eyes fixed on Holden. "Take Mr. Rockford into custody for contempt of court and perjury, and contact the district attorney's office regarding the financial fraud." The bailiff, a burly man who had been standing quietly by the door, unclipped his handcuffs and stepped forward. Outside, the California sun continued to shine brightly. Holden's video team was still waiting by the steps, cameras rolling, eagerly awaiting the triumphant exit of the internet's favorite alpha male. They were about to capture a very different kind of content. The click of the handcuffs was not loud, but in the cavernous silence of courtroom 302, it sounded like a bank vault slamming shut. Holden Rockford, the self-proclaimed titan of Silicon Valley real estate, the man whose face adorned 1,000,000 thumbnail images promising untold wealth, stared down at his wrists. The heavy, dull steel bit into the cuffs of his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He pulled his arms apart instinctively, a muscle reflex of a man used to brushing off inconveniences, but the short chain held firm. The metal was cold, unforgiving, and terrifyingly real. "This is a misunderstanding," Holden managed to choke out, his voice stripped of its usual commanding baritone. It sounded thin, reedy, like a boy caught stealing. "Your Honor, You are remanded to the custody of the county sheriff, pending arraignment on charges of perjury and criminal contempt," Judge Edwin stated, his gaze fixed on the papers before him, refusing to even look at the man. "The district attorney has been notified of the broader financial allegations. Court is adjourned." Judge Edwin struck his gavel once, a sharp, definitive crack that made Holden flinch. Holden whipped his head around to look at his lawyer. Vance was already shoving files into his leather briefcase with frantic, aggressive efficiency. "Vance, do something!" Holden hissed, leaning over the defense table, his cuffed hands dragging across the polished mahogany. "File an injunction. Call the bail bondsman. Fix this." Vance snapped his briefcase shut and looked at Holden with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You lied to me, Holden. You provided me with falsified financial disclosures and allowed me to present them to a superior court judge. You have not only jeopardized your own freedom, but you've jeopardized my license to practice law. I pay you $2,000 an hour." Holden spat, spit flying from his lips, his carefully curated alpha composure completely shattering. "Not any more, you don't," Vance replied coldly. "I am legally obligated to withdraw as your counsel due to your fraudulent actions. Do not contact my firm again. I suggest you find a public defender who specializes in federal white-collar crime." Vance turned on his heel and strode out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Sienna watched the entire exchange from the plaintiff's table. She felt no sudden rush of euphoria, no cinematic thrill of vengeance. Instead, she felt a profound, exhausting lightness. The tumor had been excised. Quentin stood beside her, methodically packing their own documents. "Let's go," Quentin murmured gently. "The back exit. There's a freight elevator that leads directly to the underground parking garage. You don't need to be seen today." Sienna nodded. As she turned to leave, she caught Holden's eye. His face was a portrait of raw, naked panic. He opened his mouth, perhaps to hurl an insult, perhaps to beg, but the burly bailiff grabbed him firmly by the bicep. "Let's walk, Mr. Rockford," the bailiff grunted, hauling Holden toward the main double doors. Holden stumbled, his Italian leather loafers skidding on the marble. As the heavy wooden doors swung open, the blinding midday California sun poured into the dim hallway. And waiting at the bottom of the grand courthouse steps was the circus Holden had paid for. Chase, Holden's 22-year-old lead videographer, was hovering near the pillars, his red camera mounted on a heavy-duty gimbal. He had been instructed to capture Holden's triumphant exit to get the low-angle, slow-motion shot of the Alpha walking out a free, single, wealthy man. When the doors opened, Chase pressed record. Holden emerged, but he wasn't striding. He was being frog-marched by 2 armed deputies. The handcuffs gleamed brightly in the sunlight. "Holden?" Clarissa's voice pierced the ambient noise of the street. She was standing exactly where he had left her, wearing her aggressively bridal white designer dress, holding an iced matcha latte. Her perfectly contoured face fell into a mask of sheer horror. Holden tried to stand up straight, trying to project strength for the cameras he knew were rolling. "Clarissa, baby, it's a mistake. Listen to me. Call the PR firm. Call crisis management. Tell them to draft a statement that my ex-wife hacked my accounts." Clarissa didn't move forward to comfort him. She didn't reach out. Instead, her phone buzzed loudly in her designer purse. She pulled it out. Because Leopold, the chairman of the board, had not waited. The moment the judge had spoken, Leopold had texted the board's emergency communications director. A press release had just hit the Bloomberg terminals and every major financial news outlet. Rockford Equities' CEO ousted amidst allegations of massive financial fraud. SEC investigation imminent. Clarissa stared at her screen. She saw the words fraud, frozen assets, and criminal investigation. She looked up at Holden. The man she had thought was a golden ticket was suddenly wearing stainless steel bracelets. He wasn't a billionaire. He was a liability. "Clarissa!" Holden yelled, his voice cracking with desperation as a local news crew, having caught wind of the commotion, began sprinting up the courthouse steps with boom mics. "Call them." Clarissa took a slow step backward, then another. She looked at the paparazzi, then at the police, and finally at Holden. Without saying a single word, she turned around, her white dress swishing around her ankles, and speed-walked toward the street, hailing a passing taxi. She was abandoning ship before it even slipped beneath the waves. "Clarissa!" Holden screamed, the sound echoing pathetically off the granite columns. "Mr. Rockford, is it true the SEC is freezing your accounts?" A reporter shouted, shoving a microphone into his face. "Are you bankrupt, Holden?" Another yelled. Holden squeezed his eyes shut, bowing his head as the flashes blinded him. Behind him, he heard a scuffle. He turned his head to see his brother, Spencer, attempting to sprint down the side ramp of the courthouse. But 2 men in dark suits, federal investigators alerted by the district attorney, were already waiting. They intercepted Spencer, slamming the terrified CFO against the granite wall. "Spencer Rockford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud," one of the agents recited loudly over the din of the reporters. As the deputies shoved Holden into the back of a black and white cruiser, his head colliding painfully with the doorframe, he looked up and saw Chase. The young videographer hadn't stopped recording. The lens was pointed directly at Holden's tear-streaked, panicked face. 4 hours later, the atmosphere inside the 40th floor boardroom of Rockford Equities was suffocating. The panoramic views of the San Francisco Bay, usually a testament to the company's dominance, now felt like a terrifying drop into the abyss. Sienna sat near the middle of the massive oak table, flanked by Quentin. She had traded her charcoal blazer for a softer, cream-colored sweater she kept in her office. Her old office, which she hadn't stepped foot in for over 8 months. At the head of the table sat Leopold. The silver-haired chairman looked 10 years older than he had that morning in the courtroom. Surrounding them were the remaining 6 board members, a collection of venture capitalists, real estate tycoons, and private equity managers. They were sweating profusely. "The stock of our publicly traded subsidiaries is in free fall," said Marcus, a board member representing a major teacher's pension fund. He was furiously wiping his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. "The news of Holden's arrest triggered automatic sell-offs. We've lost $300 million in market cap since noon. And if the rumors about the Cayman accounts are true—" "They are true," Sienna said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but the absolute certainty in it made the entire room fall silent. All eyes turned to her. For years they had viewed her as Holden's quiet accessory, the woman who organized the charity galas and balanced the books in the early days, but who had supposedly lost her edge as the company scaled. Now she was the only person in the room who wasn't panicking. Leopold cleared his throat. "Mrs. Rockford, Sienna, you provided us with the initial internal ledgers, the ones Holden attempted to bury." "I did," Sienna confirmed. "Holden transferred $42 million in liquid capital to Clarion Holdings offshore. He then leveraged the company's core commercial real estate portfolio, buildings you all thought were owned outright, to secure a mezzanine loan from a shadow lender using forged board signatures." A collective groan echoed through the room. Marcus buried his face in his hands. He raided the coffers to fund his lifestyle brand, the cars, the private jets, the YouTube studio. He bought it all with stolen corporate equity. "We are looking at Chapter 11 bankruptcy by Friday if we don't stabilize the bleeding," the company's chief legal counsel interjected grimly. "The banks will call in their loans the second the SEC formally freezes the operating accounts." Leopold leaned forward, steepling his fingers. He looked directly at Sienna. "Sienna, I have spent the last 3 hours reviewing the foundational architecture of this company. The early years, the years before Holden became whatever he is now. I saw your signature on every key acquisition, every risk assessment model, every foundational lease agreement." "Holden was the salesman," Sienna said evenly. "He was brilliant at pitching a vision. But a vision doesn't pay the electric bill. I built the infrastructure. And that infrastructure is currently collapsing," Leopold said, his voice heavy with responsibility. "Sienna, the board held an emergency vote in executive session before you arrived. We have formally terminated Holden Rockford for cause, voiding his golden parachute and severance packages due to criminal misconduct. We have also terminated Spencer Rockford." Leopold paused, taking a deep breath. "We want you to step in as interim CEO and Chief Restructuring Officer." Sienna stared at the older man. She had spent the last year dreaming of the day she would be entirely free of Rockford equities, free of the toxic shadow Holden had cast over her life. She had a ticket booked for a month-long retreat in Tuscany. She had money, her original inheritance, safely protected in a trust Holden couldn't touch, plus whatever Quentin could legally salvage from the divorce. She didn't need this. She could walk away right now, let the company burn to ash, and watch from a safe distance as Holden's empire consumed itself. It would be poetic. It would be easy. But then she looked at Marcus, the man representing the teacher's pension fund. She thought about the 2,000 employees who worked for Rockford Equities, the project managers, the janitorial staff, the architects, the administrative assistants who had mortgages to pay and children to feed. Holden hadn't just stolen from the rich. He had jeopardized the livelihoods of thousands of ordinary people who had trusted the company. True responsibility, she had realized in that quiet apartment this morning, wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about cleaning up the wreckage left behind. She had enabled Holden by staying silent for too long, by convincing herself it was easier to leave than to fight a monster she had helped create. Sienna slowly placed her hands flat on the mahogany table. The polished steel of her demeanor hardened into something even stronger. Purpose. "I will accept the position on 3 conditions," Sienna said, her voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. The board members leaned in eagerly. "Name them," Leopold said. "First, full unfettered access for my attorney, Quentin, to operate alongside our corporate counsel to claw back the Cayman funds. I know the accounts. I know the routing numbers. We are going to repatriate every single stolen dollar." Leopold nodded vigorously. "Agreed. Second, Clarissa is terminated immediately. Security is to escort her from the building, and her corporate cards are cancelled as of this second." "Already done," the legal counsel muttered. "She didn't even come back to the office after the courthouse." "And third," Sienna said, her eyes sweeping across the terrified men in the room, "there will be no golden parachutes for anyone at this table if we fail. We are not hiding behind PR spin. Tomorrow morning, I am hosting an all-hands meeting with every employee. I will tell them exactly what happened, exactly how bad it is, and exactly how we are going to fix it. Radical accountability." She used Holden's favorite buzzword, turning it into a weapon of genuine integrity. "We operate in the light, or I walk." Leopold smiled, a genuine, tired smile of profound relief. "Welcome back, Sienna. The San Francisco County Jail was a brutal shock to a sensory system accustomed to 5-star luxury. The air smelled acutely of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and old concrete. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a maddening, relentless hum, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the holding cells. Holden Rockford sat on a metal bench bolted to the wall. He was no longer wearing his bespoke suit. He had been processed, stripped, showered in freezing water, and issued a scratchy, oversized orange jumpsuit that smelled vaguely of someone else's fear. His Patek Philippe watch was sitting in a plastic evidence bag. His perfectly coiffed hair was a messy, graying mop. He was trembling. He had spent the last 5 hours pacing the 6-by-8-foot cell, muttering to himself, trying to engage his alpha mindset. "This is just a setback," he kept whispering to the concrete walls. "Lions don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. I'll bond out. I'll spin this. I'll make a video about how the Matrix tried to silence me. My followers will eat it up." But the mantras, the empty rhetoric he sold for $999 a course, felt profoundly hollow in the face of federal indictments. A heavy steel door clanged open down the hall. A deputy approached the bars of his cell. "Rockford, you get one call. Make it fast." Holden leapt off the bench, his heart hammering against his ribs. He followed the deputy to a battered wall phone, encased in a metal shroud. His hands shook violently as he dialed the number he knew by heart. He needed Clarissa. He needed her to access his emergency go-bag of cash he kept hidden in the Fairmont suite. He needed her to coordinate with a new lawyer, someone ruthless. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. "Hi, you've reached Clarissa, VP of Public Relations for Rockford Equities. I am currently unavailable. Please leave a message, and remember to always live your truth." The chipper, pre-recorded voicemail felt like a physical slap to the face. "Clarissa, it's me. Pick up. Please pick up the goddamn phone," Holden pleaded into the receiver, entirely unaware of how pathetic he sounded. "I need you to go to the suite. I need you to call. He realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that she was gone. She had seen the handcuffs and evaporated. She loved the alpha. She had no use for the inmate. He slammed the phone down, his breath hitching in a panicked sob. He had 30 seconds left. He dialed his brother's cell phone. Spencer would know what to do. Spencer had the secondary passwords. The line clicked open instantly. "Spencer! Thank God!" Holden gasped. "Listen to me. You need to wire the secondary funds to a defense firm." "I can't do that, Holden." Spencer's voice came through the receiver. It didn't sound arrogant. It sounded small, terrified, and utterly defeated. "What do you mean you can't? Are you stupid? We need lawyers." "Holden, they got me outside the courthouse," Spencer whispered, his voice cracking. "The feds. They had the Cayman routing numbers. They had emails. Emails where you ordered me to falsify the ledgers. Holden's blood turned to ice water. Spence, you didn't. I have a wife, Holden. I have a kid on the way, Spencer cried. The DA offered me a deal, 5 years minimum security if I testify against you as the primary architect of the fraud. 20 years maximum if I don't. I took the deal, Holden. I gave them everything. I gave them the hard drives. I'm sorry. I have to look out for myself. The line went dead. Holden slowly lowered the receiver. His legs gave out, and he slid down the concrete wall, his knees pulling into his chest. He was entirely alone. No wife, no mistress, no brother, no company, no money. What Holden didn't know, as he sat weeping in the fluorescent gloom of the county jail, was that his nightmare was just beginning in the digital world he had once conquered. Across the city, in a cramped, messy apartment, Chase the videographer sat bathed in the glow of his editing monitors. Chase had not been paid his $8,000 monthly retainer for 3 months. Holden had kept telling him to hustle for the exposure. Chase decided to get some exposure. He didn't edit the footage. He didn't add the driving synthwave music or the slick color grading he usually applied to Holden's videos. He simply uploaded the raw, unadulterated 4K footage of Holden Rockford being marched out of the courthouse. The footage captured every detail in excruciating high definition. The terror in Holden's eyes, the moment Clarissa abandoned him, his pathetic, voice-cracking pleas to the reporters, and the undignified way he was shoved into the police car. Chase titled the video, "The Real Rockford Alpha, Arrested for Fraud, Raw Footage." He uploaded it directly to YouTube, not on Holden's channel, but on his own, dropping the link into a massive Reddit forum dedicated to exposing fake financial gurus. The algorithm, a ruthless machine that fed on controversy and schadenfreude, caught fire. Within 2 hours, the video hit 1 million views. By hour 4, it surpassed 5 million. The karma was absolute, delivered by the very demographic Holden had manipulated for years. The comment section was a graveyard of his legacy. At Sigma Grind Set 99, Bro really sold us a $1,000 course on dominating the matrix and couldn't even dominate a divorce settlement. At Finance Bro 404, he called his wife a starter wife on a podcast last week. Looks like she just finished his whole career. At Alpha Tears, notice how fast the PR girl ran. When the money stops, the loyalty drops. True alpha move is crying in the back of a cop car. LMAO. Holden's millions of subscribers didn't rally to his defense. They turned on him with the vicious, tribal speed unique to the internet. They memed his crying face. They dissected his body language, using his own teachings to point out how beta he looked in handcuffs. As night fell over San Francisco, Sienna stood in her new corner office, looking out at the glittering skyline, a massive stack of restructuring documents waiting on her desk. She took a deep breath of clean air, ready to rebuild. And miles away, in a cold, dark cell, the deposed king of the internet pulled his knees tighter to his chest, shivering in the dark, completely and utterly broken. The next morning, the grand atrium of the Rockford Equities headquarters in downtown San Francisco was a sea of terrified faces. Over 800 employees had gathered in person, while another 1,200, tuned in, via a secure, encrypted live stream. The air was thick with the kind of existential dread that only accompanies the sudden, violent collapse of a corporate giant. Rumors had spread like wildfire. Pensions were drained, paychecks were going to bounce, and federal agents were currently seizing hard drives on the executive floor. At 9 a.m. sharp, the microphone on the makeshift stage crackled to life. Sienna walked to the podium. She wore no makeup, no flashy designer labels, and carried no notes. She stood before the massive, anxious crowd, not as a conquering hero, but as a woman stepping into a burning building to pull out survivors. Leopold stood a few paces behind her, a silent, stoic pillar of institutional support. "Good morning," Sienna began, her voice echoing through the vast, glass-paneled space. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a grounding, absolute clarity that instantly commanded the room. "My name is Sienna. Some of you know me from the early days of this company. Most of you only know the narrative my ex-husband constructed. But we are done with narratives today. Today, we deal exclusively in the truth." She paused, looking out over the sea of faces, the junior analysts clutching their coffees, the veteran project managers with mortgages, the custodial staff standing by the elevators. Yesterday afternoon, Holden Rockford was arrested and removed as CEO by the board of directors, Sienna stated, pulling no punches. He is currently facing federal indictments for perjury, wire fraud, and the gross misappropriation of company funds. Spencer Rockford is also in federal custody, cooperating with the authorities. The SEC has initiated a formal investigation into our operating accounts. A collective gasp rippled through the atrium. It was one thing to read it on Bloomberg. It was another to hear it stated so plainly by the woman in charge. "The situation is severe," Sienna continued, holding up a hand to quell the rising murmur of panic. "Holden leveraged our core commercial assets and siphoned $42 million into offshore shell companies to fund his personal brand. We are currently facing a liquidity crisis. However, we are not filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, not today. And if I have anything to say about it, not ever." She leaned closer to the microphone. "I have assumed the role of interim CEO. My mandate is not to protect a brand. My mandate is to protect you. Over the next 48 hours, my legal team, led by Quentin, is working with the Department of Justice to execute a multinational clawback of the stolen assets in the Cayman Islands. Because Holden used my maiden name as the encryption key for those accounts, we have already bypassed the first firewall." A ripple of nervous, astonished laughter broke through the tension. "Let me be absolutely clear." Sienna's tone hardened into steel. "There will be no executive bonuses this year. All corporate retreats are cancelled. The fleet of leased luxury vehicles is being returned to the dealerships this afternoon. The $70,000 monthly PR retainer has been terminated. Every single cent we save will be routed directly into payroll and the restoration of your pension funds. I am taking a salary of $1 until this company is solvent." She looked directly into the camera broadcasting to the remote workers. True responsibility is not found in a masterclass or a motivational YouTube video. It is found in the unglamorous, grueling work of cleaning up your messes. I helped build the foundation of this company, and I allowed myself to be pushed aside while it was corrupted. I own that failure. But I am here to fix it. We operate in the light from this second forward. Thank you." Sienna stepped away from the podium. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. Then, slowly, a veteran architect in the front row began to clap. It spread, rolling through the atrium like thunder, evolving into a deafening roar of genuine support. It wasn't the manufactured hype Holden used to demand. It was the profound relief of people who had finally been told the truth. Upstairs, in the executive suite, Quentin was already on a secure conference call with federal prosecutors in New York and banking regulators in the Caymans. He looked up as Sienna entered the office. "The DOJ just filed the asset forfeiture warrants," Quentin said, a rare, predatory smile touching his lips. Holden's personal accounts are frozen solid. The $42 million in Clarion Holdings is being repatriated to a court-appointed receiver by Friday. He thought he was playing 3D chess, but he left the instruction manual on the table. Sienna walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in a decade, her hands were firmly on the wheel. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge Edwin's voice was devoid of the fury it had held yesterday. Today, it was simply the cold, mechanical sound of the justice system grinding a man into dust. Holden Rockford stood up in the federal arraignment court. The bright orange jumpsuit hung loosely off his frame, entirely stripping him of his meticulously crafted silhouette. The heavy chains around his waist and ankles clinked as he moved. He looked exhausted, his skin pallid under the harsh fluorescent lights, the manicured stubble on his jaw now looking like an unkempt shadow. To his left stood his new legal representation, a tired, overworked public defender named Miller, whose primary concern was getting through the morning docket before his lunch break. "Mr. Rockford," Judge Edwin looked over his reading glasses, "you are formally charged with 3 counts of perjury, 2 counts of federal wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud a corporate board of directors. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Holden whispered, his voice cracking. He looked toward the gallery. He desperately hoped to see a friendly face, a loyal employee, a fellow alpha influencer. Anyone. The gallery was packed, but not with allies. It was filled with sketch artists, local news reporters, and several YouTubers who had flown to San Francisco overnight just to live stream their reactions to his downfall from the courthouse steps. "Bail is set at $15 million, Judge Edwin declared flatly. "And given the defendant's demonstrated ability to move vast sums of money to offshore, non-extradition jurisdictions, I am denying the 10% bond option. Bail must be posted in full, in cash. Furthermore, the defendant's passport is revoked." Holden's knees buckled slightly. $15 million in cash, with his assets frozen by the SEC and his offshore accounts currently being seized by Quentin and the DOJ, he didn't have $1,500 to his name, let alone $15 million. "Your Honor, my client objects to the bail amount as punitive," Miller started, reading half-heartedly from a legal pad. "Objection noted and overruled." Judge Edwin banged the gavel. "Remanded to federal custody. Next case." As the U.S. Marshals grabbed Holden's arms to lead him back to the holding cells, he caught a glimpse of the TV monitor mounted in the corner of the courtroom, which was silently broadcasting a national morning news show. His face was on the screen, but he wasn't the headline. Clarissa was. Holden stopped dead in his tracks, ignoring the marshal's tug. On the screen, Clarissa was sitting on the plush couch of a massively popular, notoriously dramatic podcast called The Real Truth Hour. She was dressed in a conservative soft pink cashmere sweater, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, looking like the ultimate victim. The closed captioning scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Clarissa, I was manipulated. He told me he was a self-made billionaire. I had no idea he was stealing from his employees' pensions. He controlled everything I did. The alpha thing was entirely fake. He wore lifts in his shoes. He rented all the supercars by the hour for his videos, and he made me memorize scripts to make him look good." Holden let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Clarissa hadn't just abandoned him. She had weaponized his downfall to launch her own career. She was monetizing his destruction. Host. So the whole Sigma male empire was a lie? Clarissa. Total lie. His ex-wife, Sienna. She was the real brains. Holden couldn't even read a basic profit and loss statement. He used to cry in the hotel room when his videos didn't get enough views. "Keep moving, Rockford," the marshal grunted, shoving Holden forward through the heavy steel doors leading back to the transport vans. The ride back to the Federal Detention Center was a silent descent into hell. The internet, the very beast Holden had fed and manipulated to build his ego, had fully turned its jaws upon him. Chase's raw courthouse footage had now surpassed 20 million views. Video essayists were dissecting Holden's old masterclasses, highlighting his micro-expressions, exposing his fraudulent claims. His 4 million subscribers had evaporated, replaced by an army of internet sleuths tearing apart his life brick by brick. He was placed in a medium security pod. There were no luxury thread count sheets, no organic matcha, no adoring sycophants, just cold concrete, the smell of ammonia, and the terrifying realization that his voice, the voice he had used to bully, belittle, and project false power, had been permanently muted. He curled up on his thin mattress and stared at the cinder-block wall. For the first time in his life, there was no camera to perform for. There was only the brutal, inescapable silence of his own consequences. 14 months later, the San Francisco fog rolled gently over the bay, softening the sharp edges of the city skyline. Inside the penthouse office of what was formerly Rockford Equities, the atmosphere was entirely transformed. The dark mahogany and aggressive, imposing artwork Holden had favored were gone. The space was now bright, minimalist, and open, filled with natural light and living plants. The plaque on the door read, "Veritas Development Group, Sienna Rockford, CEO." Sienna sat at her desk, reviewing the final architectural blueprints for a new affordable housing initiative the company was launching in Oakland. She looked healthy, vibrant, and deeply grounded. The exhaustion of the divorce was a distant memory, replaced by the quiet, enduring strength of a woman who had pulled a company back from the brink of annihilation. The door opened, and Quentin walked in, carrying a single, slim leather folder. He didn't look like a man arriving for a tense legal battle. He looked like a man delivering the final page of a very long, very satisfying book. "The final filings from the Department of Justice," Quentin said, placing the folder on Sienna's desk. He took a seat across from her, a genuine warm smile on his face. "Is it done?" Sienna asked, putting down her glasses. "It's done," Quentin confirmed. "The court-appointed receiver has officially finished unwinding Clarion Holdings. All $42 million have been repatriated. The employee pension fund is entirely whole, with an additional 7% yield to account for the lost time. The SEC has formally closed their investigation into Veritas Development, citing your extraordinary cooperation and exemplary corporate restructuring." Sienna let out a long, slow breath, feeling the final, heavy weight lift from her shoulders. She had done it. She had saved the livelihoods of 2,000 people. "And Holden?" she asked softly. It wasn't out of malice, but a necessary final accounting. "He took the plea deal 3 weeks ago," Quentin replied, opening the folder to reveal a typed federal summary. He realized going to trial against Spencer's testimony, Leopold's board records, and the Cayman ledgers was a suicide mission. He pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of perjury. The sentence? 84 months, 7 years in federal prison, no possibility of early parole, Quentin stated smoothly. He's currently serving his time at FCY Lompoc. His remaining legitimate assets were liquidated to pay federal fines. He has nothing left. Quentin leaned forward slightly. There's one more piece of poetic justice, if you will. Clarissa's attempt to pivot into a survivor influencer didn't last. The internet's attention span is short. Once she ran out of embarrassing stories about Holden, her views tanked. She tried to launch her own PR consulting firm last month. It filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Sienna didn't smile or gloat. True power didn't require celebrating the misery of others. She simply nodded. Karma is a precise accountant. Indeed, Quentin said, sliding a final document toward her. This is the final dissolution of the marital estate. The Tahoe cabin was sold to cover the remaining legal fees. All that's left is your signature to formally close the case. Sienna reached into the top drawer of her desk. She pulled out a heavy, gold-plated Montblanc pen. The same pen Holden had arrogantly pushed across the table 14 months ago. Keep the pen, Sienna. Consider it my final gift. You're going to need it to fill out job applications. She uncapped the pen. The ink flowed smoothly as she signed her name on the final line, legally and completely erasing Holden Rockford from her life. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. She capped the pen, placed it carefully back in her drawer, and looked out the window at the city she was helping to build. Meanwhile, 300 miles south, the midday sun beat down relentlessly on the concrete yard of FCI Lompoc. Inmate number 88492-011 pushed a heavy canvas cart full of soiled laundry toward the industrial washing machines. Holden Rockford wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of a calloused, blistered hand. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. As he loaded the machines, a small television mounted in the corner of the laundry room played the midday financial news. The anchor's voice drifted over the hum of the washing machines. And in a stunning corporate turnaround, Veritas Development Group, formerly Rockford Equities, has posted its highest quarterly earnings in 5 years. CEO Sienna Rockford, credited with saving the company from the brink of collapse, following a massive fraud scandal by its former leadership, stated today. Holden stopped. He turned slowly toward the screen. There was Sienna, standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, surrounded by her employees, ringing the closing bell. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly untouchable. Holden stared at the screen. The heavy, suffocating weight of his reality crashed down upon him. He had thought he was the architect of his own destiny, the alpha who controlled the narrative. But in the end, he was just a footnote in her story. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned back to the laundry cart, gripped the handles with shaking hands, and pushed it forward into the long, dark, quiet years ahead. What a journey! From the hollow arrogance of a man who thought he could manipulate the world, to the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who chose responsibility over revenge. Sienna didn't just walk away. She stayed, faced the fire, and rebuilt an empire on the foundation of truth. Holden learned the hardest way possible that a curated image can never outrun genuine karma, and the internet never forgets. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that true power lies in integrity, and that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest, please hit that like button. It helps the channel grow and tells the algorithm you want more grounded, dramatic stories like this. Share this video with someone who loves a satisfying twist of karma, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Remember, true success isn't built on deceit. It's built on the solid ground of accountability. Until next time, stay strong, stay honest, and keep living your truth.